We'll be back in 5 minutes. Enjoy your news break.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from E-Verify, dedicated to providing employment eligibility verification for the needs of businesses and the employees that help them thrive. Let's go higher. everify.gov/go.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Speer. The Trump administration is imposing sanctions on Venezuela's state oil company to make sure that Nicolas Maduro and his embattled administration don't benefit from the oil trade. As NPR's Michelle Kellerman explains, the U.S. is stepping up pressure on Maduro to give up power.
National Security Advisor John Bolton says the U.S. wants to make sure Maduro can no longer, quote, loot the assets of the Venezuelan people. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin says the U.S. is blocking the accounts of PDVSA, the state-owned oil company.
The path to sanctions relief for PDVSA is through the expeditious transfer of control to the interim president or a subsequent democratically elected government.
The Trump administration has recognized the head of the National Assembly as Venezuela's interim president and has been trying to bolster Juan Guaido's chances of getting control over state assets and the military. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
Despite ending the federal government shutdown for now, President Trump is not giving high odds for congressional negotiators to reach a deal to end a border wall standoff. The president saying today he thinks odds lawmakers will craft a deal are less than 50-50. Trump told the Wall Street Journal he's not optimistic about lawmakers coming up with a deal he'll accept. Trump has pledged to either shut down the government again or build a wall anyway, using his executive powers to declare a national emergency. Hundreds of thousands of furloughed federal government workers are returning to the job today. The U.S. government has begun production of a new tactical nuclear weapon. NPR's Jeff Bromfield reports the Trump administration wants the weapon to deter Russia.
The new weapon is a variant of one that's currently used on submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The new version is low yield, meaning it packs just a fraction of the punch of a full-powered nuke. Last year, the Trump administration said it needed these smaller weapons to match Russia's. But Hans Christensen of the Federation of American Scientists warns all these little nukes are dangerous.
A nuke is a nuke, and once it's used, the gloves are off.
He worries a nuclear war could get out of control. The Department of Energy says it will deliver a small number of these new weapons to the Navy by October. Jeff Brumfield, NPR News, Washington.
The interest rate-setting Federal Reserve meets this week in Washington, with the group's meeting scheduled to end on Wednesday. Most analysts expect the Fed to keep a key short-term interest rate controls in a range between 2.25% and 2.5%. Fed watchers will also be parsing the group's end-of-meeting statement and any comments from Fed Chair Jerome Powell, who lately has been using the word patient to describe Fed policy in regards to future interest rate hikes. Stocks lost ground today on Wall Street. The Dow was down 208 points to 24,528. The Nasdaq closed down 79 points. The S&P fell 20 points today. You're listening to NPR. The Treasury Department says it has lifted sanctions against 3 Russian companies connected to billionaire Oleg Deripaska. The announcement comes a move that wreaked havoc on global aluminum markets last year and reverses that move. The Treasury and supporters of the move, it was an example of sanctions working as they should in changing behavior. Due to the sanctions, Deripaska agreed to reduce his shareholdings below 50%. A team of astronomers in Japan has found a new object in the outer solar system, but as NPR's Joe Palca explains, what makes the discovery unusual is it was made with amateur telescopes costing about $5,000 each.
There's a group of icy, rocky bodies orbiting the sun way past the orbit of Neptune. These so-called Kuiper Belt objects are thought to be the remnants of the early days of our solar system. Most of these objects are too dim to be seen with even the largest telescopes on Earth, but there's another way to spot them. When they pass in front of a star, light from that star dims for a fraction of a second. Turns out small amateur telescopes are good enough to measure that brief dimming. A team from Kyoto University found one such dimming event caused by an object about 2 miles across. The discovery appears in the journal Nature Astronomy. Joe Palca, NPR News.
Labor Relations Board is saying not so fast regarding a plan by the Teamsters to represent Lyft drivers who ferry passengers around Walt Disney World in Florida. National Labor Relations Board ruling against the Orlando Teamsters local on the ground that Lyft drivers have different responsibilities than bus drivers who are currently represented by the union. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Welcome back to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 5 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to the Paranormal Pride. I'm your host, Denise Pridemore. This is our second hour of the show, so if you guys have any questions out there whatsoever for my guest, Frank Bennett, the author of Encounter with the Aberdeen Wild Man, A True Story, this would be a great time to get those questions out there. So when we left, we were talking about Bigfoot and evidence. My question is, we've got all these shows, killing Bigfoot and BFRO is out there and Matt Moneymaker is beating on a tree trying to get Bigfoot to show up and things like that. Why can't they find even a dead Bigfoot? If there's, is there a Bigfoot burial ground somewhere? Beam me up, Scotty. What's going on?
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I try to be nice to the Finding Bigfoot people, but gosh, you guys give me just too much material to work with here. But after so many seasons on the air, you all managed to find everything but Bigfoot. You got stories and experiences with people, and you found a lot of friendly buffets to go to, but no Bigfoot. So anyway, you see, I believe it's designed. I believe Bigfoot counters are designed, not sightings, encounters. There's a difference between the two. I'm the kind of person where one will probably walk up to me while I'm taking out the garbage. I know people who have been hunting for Bigfoot for 20 years and have never seen one. I mean, professional hunters. So I believe that much like spiritual assaults, it's a targeted thing, and it's done by design. And so
why?
In the book, after comparing all of the characteristics that the Sasquatch, notice I don't call him Bigfoot much, I call him Sasquatch. Right. And that's because I relied heavily on the Native American Indians for the information about the Bigfoot. And after a while, you kind of learn to just call it a Sasquatch. It's a better name for it. And their cohabitation with the Bigfoots, Sasquatches, go back thousands of years. And in the book, I also talk about how all the individual Indian tribes had their own names for the Bigfoot. And I'm talking names like Tall Burnt Hair, Owl Woman, Owl Monster Woman, the Trickster, as called by the Apaches, Gamekeeper. And as you go through these names, you start to realize that, they don't talk about the Sasquatch in the same way they talk about the deer or the elk or the bear or the wolf. They're referring, this thing is not an animal to them. It was more of a spirit. It had proven himself to be much more than a living thing. And so that's how I got the idea that if somebody thinks they're seeing a Sasquatch, and like I said before, destination, is this thing a living thing or not? You don't know until you put it to the test. You don't know until you take a shot at it, which many people have, by the way. It's been shot many times. What you're exactly dealing with. In the book, when I'm talking about lycanthropy, I postulate, how powerful spiritual forces can transform a living thing to appear as something else. When somebody's taking a shot at a Sasquatch, if they're not actually hitting a bear, but to them it appears at a Sasquatch. And proof of this, partial proof to this, is that almost each and every time a sample of Sasquatch DNA, blood, hair, whatever, has been sent out for analysis, it has come back as either bear or indeterminate, meaning not enough sample to get an analysis out of. So that's how my train of thought works on this.
That makes sense. So to me that they find I
think taking NyQuil is a fantastic idea.
Again, nobody can hear what's going on in the background. They can only hear me and you, so which is funny. So it happens. So I just always found it I can see where the Native Americans would consider the Sasquatch to be a spiritual being. I can see that. But the question we have in the chat room is going to go to a different part of the subject. And Carl from Caldwell County Paranormal Team, he asks, where do you get your research for like Goatman and Mothman and things like that?
It took me a while to write the book. And in the years leading, it took me probably 5 years. Like I said, I was working as a demolition contractor at the time, and I just have thoughts, and I do a little research wherever city I'm in, go to libraries and stuff like that, get online, and review videos people post over and over again, and I write down bits and pieces of the book as I go. And for more information about all these things, one of the colleges I relied on is in mid part of Pennsylvania. I believe I forgot the name of the college, but they're the ones who gave me a lot of the information about the Native American Indian tribes and how they related to the Sasquatch.
Well, there you go. Did you do any research on Mothman?
No.
Okay.
No, and as you notice, he's really not prevalent in the book very much. And let's bear in mind something. The only reason why you and I are even talking about the Mothman at all is because associated with it was this horrific tragedy that took place in the mid-'60s that killed about 54 people. If it wasn't for that event, which went national through the loss of life, and the Mothman story attached to it, you would never have heard of Mothman. Much like I have to tell people about the Aberdeen Wildman because nobody outside of my immediate area even knows about it.
Right. I didn't know about it, and I lived there.
Right. And as I have traveled the country these past years, doing all these shows all over the country, I have had people come up to my table and tell me stories about their creatures that I've never heard of. For example, when I was in Washington State doing a show on the West Coast 2-3 years ago, I had some people from the local Indian tribe up there come tell me about an ancient legend of their people where they would have what they call stick people who would come out of the woods and attack their villages at night. And they actually look like walking trees. Limbs for arms, limbs for legs actually look like walking trees. I had never heard of this thing before.
Me either.
But yeah, you were talking about you were talking about the Goatman and stuff like that. I lived in Florida for several years. Florida has the skunk ape, but also you'll find a skunk ape in Louisiana and lower part of Arkansas.
Yep. And
in fact,
they say that we have them here in Kansas for some reason.
Right, exactly. And, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of these individual type creatures all over the country that have yet to see the light of day, just not gotten that kind of publicity. The reason why I publicize the Aberdeen Wildman so much is because, and, ahead of all the other things I seen and I encountered, is that I encountered something that looked like a human being, but it had a spiritual quality to it because I knew it was there before I even saw it. And it also, though being just appearing to be a human, did these superhuman things. So it was the perfect marriage of this strange and bizarre spirit physical merger. And that's why he's the central focus of the examination in the book. He has those qualities. I've also encountered dark entities and things like that, but people in the paranormal community are pretty well already familiar with those.
They are. I mean, when I read your book, I was like, I've heard of all these other things. I've heard of Goatman. Excuse me. I've heard of Bigfoot. I've heard of, multiple of these different monsters, for lack of a better term. I had never heard of the Aberdeen Wildman. I was like, I grew up in the area. Why didn't I know about this? Was I just that sheltered? Was I too young to know about this stuff by the time I left? I don't know. Maybe I was too busy seeing spirits to pay attention to this other stuff. Who knows? Mm-hmm. But I mean,
it was like that rear view mirror analogy I used earlier. Mm-hmm. You have something traumatic happen paranormal wise. Life goes on, and you tend to kind of put it behind you until the next time.
Or you know what? Maybe I did see it and I forgot. Somehow. Mm-hmm. Because I had that experience recently too, to where I